4 days before my 70th birthday party, my hairdresser locked the back door of her salon and told me to sit down and not make a sound. I didn't argue. Millie Hutchins had been cutting my hair for 22 years. She'd seen me through my husband's funeral, my hip surgery, 2 hurricanes, and the year my son stopped speaking to me. When Millie told you to sit, you sat. She turned off the overhead light. The salon went dim, just the glow from the street coming through the frosted front window. I could hear voices in the storage room behind us, the one that shared a thin wall with the insurance office next door. I recognized my daughter-in-law's voice first, that careful, measured way she had of speaking, like every word was being weighed before she released it. Then my son, lower, quicker, the way he talked when he was nervous. Then a third voice, a man I didn't recognize at first, clipped, professional, and then I placed it. My attorney, the one I'd trusted for 11 years. Millie squeezed my hand in the dark. I held my breath and listened. My name came up in the first 30 seconds, then the words power of attorney. Then a number that made my stomach drop. $480,000. The value of the lake house in Asheville that Franklin and I had bought in 1991. The house where my grandchildren learned to swim. The house where I scattered Franklin's ashes off the back dock in 2017. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I sat in Millie's salon chair in the dark and listened to my son and my daughter-in-law and my attorney discuss how to take everything I had left. I'm grateful you're here with me for this. Before I go on, I want to say that some details in this story have been changed slightly to protect those still involved in legal proceedings. But the heart of it, every word spoken through that wall, every decision I made in the days that followed, that's real. I lived it, and I need to tell it. My name is Norma Jean Wakefield. I'm 70 years old. I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I've lived in Clover Hill, Virginia, for the last 43 years. I raised 2 children in this town. I buried my husband here. I built a small business here, Wakefield Home Interiors, a design and staging company that Franklin and I started in our garage in 1988 with $4,000 and a used drafting table. By 2010, Wakefield Home Interiors had 12 employees and contracts with 3 of the largest real estate firms in the Shenandoah Valley. We were never flashy, we were steady. Franklin used to say, steady beats flashy every single time, and he was right. When Franklin died of a stroke in March 2017, I was 61 years old. My son was 38. My daughter was 35 and living in Portland. The business was worth, at that point, approximately $2 million, not counting the lake house or our primary home on Ridgemont Drive. My son had worked alongside me for 9 years. He wasn't as instinctive as Franklin had been, but he was reliable and clients trusted him. In 2018, I made him vice president of operations. In 2020, I began the process of gradually transitioning day-to-day management to him. I wasn't ready to retire. I just wanted to breathe a little. His wife came into the picture in 2019. He'd been dating her for about a year before he brought her home for Thanksgiving. She was pleasant, organized. She had a master's degree in finance and a way of steering conversations that I didn't notice at first. By 2021, she had started accompanying my son to client meetings. By 2022, she was signing off on vendor contracts. She never had a formal title. I never formally approved her involvement. It happened the way fog happens, gradually, and then all at once. And by the time you notice, you can't see the road anymore. The comments started small. Mom, you've been working so hard. Don't you think it's time to slow down? Norma, I read an article about early-stage memory issues in women over 65. Have you thought about getting evaluated? She forgot the Hargrove meeting was moved, and this isn't the first time. That last one was said at a staff meeting in September 2023. My daughter-in-law said it in front of 4 employees. I had not forgotten the meeting. My assistant, a woman named Bet, who had been with me for 16 years, had put the wrong time on the shared calendar. Bet corrected her. My daughter-in-law smiled and said, "Of course. I just want to make sure we're all supporting Norma." I told myself she meant well. I know now that she didn't. The gaslighting escalated through the fall. Small incidents carefully documented. A lunch I supposedly forgot that I had never been told about. A client name I allegedly mispronounced that I had pronounced correctly. My doctor, a man I'd been seeing for 6 years, began gently raising questions about my cognitive health. He'd start appointments with little tests. "What day is it, Norma? Can you count backward from 100 by 7s?" I humored him. I thought he was being thorough. In January 2024, My son sat me down in my own living room and told me he was worried. He said my doctor had reached out to him directly, without my knowledge, without my consent, and that there were concerns. He said it might be time to talk about the future of the business. I told him I was fine. He said, "I know you think that, Mom." And I went home and I called my daughter in Portland and she said, "Maybe they have a point. Maybe you should get checked out." And something in me went quiet and small and frightened, the way you feel when the people who are supposed to love you start making you doubt the ground beneath your feet. That was January. By March, my son had drafted a succession document that he asked me to sign. He called it a transitional leadership agreement. My attorney, the same one I would later hear through Millie's wall, had prepared it. I read the first 2 pages and it seemed reasonable. I didn't read page 9. I signed it. I didn't know what page 9 said. Not yet. 4 days before my birthday party, I walked into Millie's salon for a trim and a blowout. The party was Saturday. 80 guests. My home on Ridgemont Drive. My daughter was flying in from Portland. I was looking forward to it more than I'd looked forward to anything in a long time. Millie met me at the door. Her face was wrong. I've known her long enough to read her face the way I read weather. And what I saw was a storm coming. She put her hand on my arm. "Norma, something happened this morning. You need to hear it. But not out here." She locked the door. She turned off the lights. She pulled me into the main salon floor, away from the windows, and she sat me down. "My storage room shares a wall with Aldrich and Associates," she whispered. "The insurance office. Except they sublease the back room twice a week to a law firm for client consultations." I hadn't known that. "This morning they were in there. Your son, his wife, and the man I've seen you with, your attorney." She didn't have to say anything else. She just put her finger to her lips and pointed at the wall, and I listened. What I heard in the next 20 minutes restructured everything I thought I knew about the previous 3 years. My daughter-in-law was speaking. She was calm. She always was. She was saying that the transitional leadership agreement I'd signed in March had a clause on page 9 that I needed to understand. If a licensed physician certified cognitive impairment, the agreement activated immediately, not gradually, not after review, immediately. Full transfer of operational control, signatory authority, and vendor relationships to my son, acting as sole director. My son said, "And the lake house?" My attorney said, "Once she's under guardianship, the trust restructuring is straightforward. We file in Botetourt County. Given Dr. Heller's assessment timeline, we're looking at 30 to 45 days. Dr. Heller, my doctor. The one who'd been testing my memory since fall. My daughter-in-law. The birthday party is actually useful timing. Family gathered, emotional atmosphere. We ask her to sign the estate addendum Saturday evening. She won't want to make a scene." Son said nothing. My son said nothing. I heard him law again. "She trusts you. That's the whole point." Millie's hand found mine in the dark. I didn't cry. I'm 70 years old and I've been through enough to know that crying can wait. What I felt was something colder and quieter than grief. It was clarity. The specific, terrible clarity of understanding something that has been true for a long time and that you were not willing to see. When the voices stopped, when I heard chairs and footsteps and a door, Millie turned on the light. She said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know if I should call you, but I couldn't just." "You did the right thing," I said. "Thank you." I picked up my purse. I walked out into the April sunlight. The street looked the same as it always had. The coffee shop across the way. The hardware store Franklin used to spend entire Saturday mornings in. Everything ordinary and familiar and completely changed. I sat in my car for a long time. 80 guests. Saturday. My doctor was planning to submit a cognitive assessment sometime in the next 30 to 45 days. My attorney had helped draft a document I didn't read all the way through. My son had said, "I know you think that, Mom, the way you speak to a child who doesn't understand their own situation." And I had listened. I had doubted myself. I had almost walked right into it. I started the car. I had 4 days. The first person I called was not a lawyer. It was my daughter. She answered on the second ring. I told her everything calmly in the parking lot of Millie's salon. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Mom, I'm booking a flight tonight." The second call I made was to a woman named Aldridge, Cecilia Aldridge, a retired federal prosecutor I'd met through the Chamber of Commerce in 2019. We'd served on a historic preservation committee together for 2 years. She was 73, sharp as a blade, and she owed me nothing, which was exactly why I trusted her. I told her what I'd heard. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "Do you still have the original document you signed in March?" I did. "Read page 9 tonight." Call me after. We're going to need an elder law attorney, a forensic accountant, and someone who can verify your physician's record keeping. Can you help me find them? I'm already writing the names down. I didn't sleep that night. I read page 9 of the Transitional Leadership Agreement 3 times. My kitchen table, my reading glasses. A cup of tea that went cold before I touched it. Page 9 was not subtle once you knew what you were looking for. The language about cognitive impairment was buried in subsection 4b, under a heading called Continuity Provisions. If any licensed physician with existing patient relationships submitted written certification of impaired executive function, the agreement entered immediate effect. No second opinion required, no 30-day waiting period, no notice to me. I photographed every page. I sent it to Cecilia at 11:15 at night. She replied 12 minutes later. This is designed to activate before you can respond. They were counting on you not reading it. Thursday morning, I drove to Charlottesville and met with an elder law attorney named Mercer. Patricia Mercer, silver-haired, unhurried, with the kind of calm that made you feel like whatever was happening was survivable. She read the agreement while I sat across from her. When she set it down, she said, "Have you contacted your bank?" "Not yet. First thing this afternoon. You need to notify them that your accounts may be subject to a fraudulent guardianship attempt and request that any signatory changes require your in-person authorization only. Can we block the agreement itself? We can challenge it. But we need Dr. Heller's records first. If he's been documenting fabricated incidents, that's your foundation." She paused. "Do you know anyone who was present at these incidents he supposedly documented?" I thought of Bet. 16 years. She'd been in the room for almost every one of those meetings. "Yes," I said, "I do. Bet met me at my house that evening. She brought a folder. I hadn't asked her to. She'd been keeping it herself for 6 months because something had felt wrong and she hadn't known what to do with that feeling. Inside were printed copies of emails. Calendar entries with original timestamps that contradicted the revised versions that had appeared in my son's documentation. Notes she'd written to herself after 3 separate incidents the doctor had recorded as evidence of confusion. "The Hargrove meeting," she said. "I have the original calendar invitation. The time was changed 12 minutes before the meeting started. I have the edit history." I held her hand. I told her she had just saved me. Friday was long. Cecilia's forensic accountant, a man named Whitfield, which I know sounds like I made it up, but I did not, spent 6 hours going through Wakefield Home Interior's financial records. What he found was not what I'd expected. My daughter-in-law had been moving small amounts, not the dramatic wire transfers you read about. 400 here, 800 there. Vendor overpayments that came back to a holding account my son controlled. Over 18 months, the total was just under $62,000, small enough to escape notice, large enough to matter. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was a contract my son had signed in February, without my knowledge, without my authorization, with a property development firm based in Roanoke. A preliminary agreement to sell Wakefield Home Interiors as a going concern. The price was $410,000. The company was worth $2 million. He'd agreed to sell my life's work for $410,000, and he'd done it 2 months before my birthday party, and he'd never said a word to me about it. I sat in my kitchen Friday night with my daughter, who had arrived that afternoon from Portland. She read the contract twice. Then she set it down on the table and looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was small and something had happened that she couldn't fix. "Mom," she said. "I know," I said. "What are we going to do?" I looked at her. She had Franklin's eyes, the same gray-green, the same directness. She'd been calling me every other week for 3 years. She'd sent birthday cards and care packages. She'd offered to come home twice, and I'd told her not to worry, that everything was fine, that her brother was handling things. I had protected her from this, and in doing so, I had almost walked into it alone. "We're going to the party," I said. She stared at me. "And at the party, I'm going to let them think everything is going exactly as they planned. And then I'm going to show every single person in that room exactly who they are." Saturday, my 70th birthday. The house on Ridgemont Drive had been decorated by the weekend before. Streamers I'd thought were sweet, flowers I'd assumed were generous. Now I walked through every room and saw the performance it actually was. The warmth my daughter-in-law wore like a costume. The solicitous way my son touched my elbow when we passed each other, steering me, always steering me. 80 guests arrived between 5 and 6. People I'd known for decades, former clients, neighbors. women from my church, 3 of my original employees. George Maddox, who'd been Franklin's closest friend and was now 81 and still sharp as a tack. Bet, who stood near the kitchen and gave me a small nod when she arrived. And my attorney. He came at 5:30, greeting people warmly, drink in hand, comfortable, unhurried. A man who expected the evening to go a certain way. At 7 o'clock, my son clinked his glass. He gave a toast. He said I was the strongest woman he'd ever known. He said, "Be proud." He looked at me across the room with an expression I now recognized as something very different from love. I smiled at him. I held my champagne glass and I smiled. At 7:30, my daughter-in-law appeared at my elbow with a small envelope. "Norma, we put together something for you. A little estate planning gift. Just a formality. It consolidates some things and simplifies the paperwork going forward." She smiled. "Nothing dramatic. We just want to make sure everything is protected." She held out a pen. I looked at the envelope. I looked at her. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "Why don't I read it first?" Her smile didn't waver. "Of course." "There's no rush." I set the envelope on the mantelpiece. At 8 o'clock, I asked for the room's attention. 80 people turned toward me. My son stood near the back. His wife was beside him. My attorney was at the drinks table. My daughter stood near the fireplace, and she was the only person in that room besides me and Cecilia and Bet who knew what was coming. I thanked everyone for being there. I talked about Franklin. I talked about 43 years in Clover Hill and what this community had meant to me. I talked about building something from nothing and what it costs and what it gives you back. And then I said, "I want to share something with you tonight because I've learned something this week that I think people in this room deserve to know." My son's face changed. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed a folded sheet of paper. I didn't unfold it. I just held it. 4 days ago, I discovered that a document I signed in March contains a clause designed to strip me of control of my business and my assets the moment my physician, files a certification that I am cognitively impaired. The room was very quiet. That certification was scheduled to be filed within the next 30 days. Tonight, I was going to be asked to sign an additional document which my daughter-in-law presented to me 20 minutes ago. That would have further simplified the transfer of the Asheville Lake House. I looked at my son. I didn't know any of this. I thought the document I signed in March was a routine succession plan. I trusted the attorney who drafted it. I looked at my attorney. He set down his drink. I also trusted my doctor of 6 years, who, I have now learned, documented 5 incidents of cognitive decline over the past 8 months. Incidents that my assistant Bet can prove, with time-stamped calendar records and witness statements, never occurred as described. Bet stepped forward from near the kitchen. "I have verified every date," she said. Her voice was steady. She'd rehearsed this. "I was present at each of those meetings. The records have been falsified." My attorney moved toward the hall door. 2 men, off-duty sheriff's deputies I'd hired as courtesy security for the party, stepped into his path. I unfolded the paper in my hand. "I want to read you something." Page 9, subsection 4B of the Transitional Leadership Agreement, signed March 14, 2024. Continuity provisions. In the event written certification of cognitive impairment is submitted by any licensed physician, maintaining an existing patient relationship with Norma Jean Wakefield, this agreement shall immediately enter full operational effect, transferring all corporate signatory authority, client relationships, vendor contracts, and fiduciary control to the named successor, without further consent, notice, or waiting period. I folded the paper again. That language was not explained to me. I was told this was a routine transition document. My attorney prepared it. My son presented it. And my doctor was prepared to supply the certification that would have triggered it. George Maddox, 81 years old, Franklin's oldest friend, stood up from his chair. He didn't say anything. He just stood. 3 other people stood. Former clients. People who'd known me for 20-30 years. My son stepped forward. "Mom, you're making this into something it isn't." I looked at him. My boy. 38 years I had loved him. 10 years I had built beside him. 3 years I had watched him let someone lead him somewhere I would not have believed he could go. "I have the contract," I said quietly. "The one you signed in February. Selling Wakefield Home Interiors to a Roanoke development firm for $410,000. Without my knowledge. Without my authorization." Someone in the back said, "Oh my God." I turned to the room. "I'm not telling you this for drama. I'm telling you because 2 other women in Clover Hill have been targeted this way in the last 4 years. I know this because Cecilia Aldridge spent this week making calls. Cecilia, standing near the window, nodded once. Elder financial abuse doesn't look the way people imagine it. It doesn't come from strangers. It comes from people who know your habits, your fears, your trust. It comes from people who understand that the most effective way to take something from someone is to first make them doubt themselves. I looked at my daughter-in-law. She met my gaze. She was still composed. She was very good at composed. You told me I was forgetting things I wasn't forgetting. You told my son I needed protection from my own business decisions. You arranged for my doctor to begin documenting a decline that did not exist. And tonight you handed me an envelope and called it a birthday gift. She opened her mouth. Don't, I said. The two deputies moved forward. My attorney was already at the door, or trying to be. Patricia Mercer, who had arrived at 7:45 as a guest and was standing very calmly near the bookshelves, held up a folder. I'll need you to remain, Mr. Aldrich. The county attorney's office has some questions. My son was still standing in the center of the room. His wife had taken one step back from him, a small but visible separation, the instinct of someone calculating distance. He looked at me, and for just a moment, before his face went rigid, I saw something in it that was not calculation or fear. Something younger. Something that remembered being the little boy who used to fall asleep on the couch with his head in my lap while Franklin watched baseball. It nearly broke me. I let it nearly break me. And then I kept going. I love you, I said to him quietly, so only he could hear, and I will not let you do this to me, or to yourself. The officers led my attorney out first. My daughter-in-law was asked to remain and speak with investigators. My son sat down. He didn't resist. He just sat down in one of my dining chairs and stared at the floor while the room moved around him. My daughter appeared at my side. She took my hand. She didn't say anything. George Maddox crossed the room and stood in front of me. He was carrying a small plate of cake, which struck me as the most normal thing I'd ever seen. Franklin would have been very proud of you tonight, he said. Very proud. I thanked him. I was very tired. The months that followed were not simple. They rarely are. My attorney surrendered his license and pled guilty to charges of fraud and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse in September. He was sentenced to 4 years. My doctor, Dr. Heller, appeared before the Virginia Board of Medicine in August. His license was suspended pending investigation. A civil suit filed by Patricia Mercer on my behalf sought damages for fraudulent diagnosis and breach of fiduciary duty. 2 other patients subsequently came forward with similar accounts. The investigation is ongoing. My daughter-in-law was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and financial exploitation of an incapacitated adult. Though I was never incapacitated, the statute applied to the attempt. She negotiated a plea in November. Community service, restitution of the $62,000, and a suspended sentence that remains contingent on conditions I am not at liberty to detail. My son was not charged. The prosecutors determined that he had been directed, manipulated, and had ultimately not benefited directly from the financial transfers. I gave a statement in his favor. That was the hardest thing I did in all of it. Harder than the birthday party, harder than sitting in Millie's salon in the dark, harder than reading page 9. But I knew my son, not the man he had become under that influence, but the man underneath. And I believed that man was still there. The contract with the Roanoke firm was voided. Wakefield Home Interiors is still mine. Bed is still with me. We hired 2 new designers in the spring and took on a contract with a resort developer in the Shenandoah Valley that Franklin would have loved. The lake house in Asheville is still mine too. I spent a week there in October. I sat on the back dock in the evenings and watched the water and talked to Franklin the way I've talked to him since 2017, out loud, quietly, knowing he can't answer and doing it anyway. I told him about all of it. He would have had thoughts. He always did. My daughter called every Sunday. She started talking about maybe moving back east, maybe Charlottesville, maybe closer. I told her I didn't need her to upend her life. She said she was thinking about it anyway. My son wrote me a letter in October. 7 pages, handwritten. He described what the past 3 years had looked like from inside. The way his wife had slowly narrowed his world. The way she'd made him feel that taking care of me meant taking control. The way he'd rationalized each step because each step was small. He wrote, I told myself it was for you. I need you to know that I know it wasn't. I know what it was. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I see it now. I read it twice. Then I sat in Thomas's old chair in the study, Franklin's chair, I mean. I still sometimes call it by the wrong name, and I am not losing my mind. I am just 63 years into knowing the man, and I let myself cry. I wrote back, 4 pages. I told him what he'd done, had broken something real, and that we would not pretend otherwise. I told him I'd protected him in my statement, because I loved him and because I believed he had been led somewhere. He would not have gone on his own. I told him that love doesn't require me to act as though nothing happened, and I told him that if he wanted to rebuild something with me, I was willing to try, on my terms, slowly. He called me in November. We talked for 40 minutes. It was awkward and careful and true. In December, my daughter came home for the holidays. Just the 2 of us and George Maddox, who joined us for Christmas dinner, because he'd been alone since his wife passed in 2021, and because Franklin would have wanted it that way. After dinner, my daughter and I sat on the porch with our coats on even though it was cold, because the sky was extraordinary. That kind of December sky that's so clear and dark you feel like you're looking through it into something beyond. She said, "Mom, can I ask you something always? How did you know? At the party, how did you know it was going to work?" I thought about it. About Millie's hand finding mine in the dark. About Bet's folder. About Cecilia already writing names down before I'd even finished asking. About Patricia Mercer standing calmly near the bookshelves at precisely the right moment. "I didn't know it was going to work," I said. "I just knew I wasn't going to sit still and let it happen to me." She was quiet for a minute. "Good," she said. The oak tree in the front yard had lost its leaves by then, just bare branches against that cold December sky. Franklin had planted it the spring we moved in, 1981, from a sapling he'd bought at a church fundraiser for $4. It was now 40 feet tall. I looked at it and I thought about all the things that grow slowly when you're not watching. Good things and bad things both. I thought about the women Cecilia had found. The ones in Clover Hill who'd been targeted the way I'd been targeted, who hadn't had a Millie, hadn't had a Bet, hadn't had 43 years of people who knew them and could stand up in a room and say I was there. And that is not what happened. I thought about them for a long time. And then my daughter put her head on my shoulder the way she hadn't since she was a teenager. And I put my arm around her, and we sat on my porch in the cold and looked at the tree my husband had planted and let the night be what it was. Not fixed, not finished, but ours. If you've stayed with me this long, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, would you have exposed it the way I did? Or would you have handled it differently? I'm genuinely asking. Not everyone who writes to me has had a room full of people to stand up. Some of you have faced this kind of thing alone, and I want you to know I see that. Thank you for listening. I mean that.